And recording. All right, so we're studying the halachas of Pesach, and the halachas of Pesach starts from the Shloshim Yom Lifnei Chag. Really starts from the day after Purim, from Purim, because 30 days before the Yom Tov, you have to start learning the halachas of Yom Tov. It's true for Pesach, it's true for Shavuos, it's true for Sukkot. So every Yom Tov, we do that. The particular is really from Pesach, in the sense that Pesach has a lot more halachas, but it's said for every Yom Tov. The Alter brings in Shulchan Aruch for every Yom Tov, 30 days, Shloshim Yom Lifnei Chag, 30 days before Yom Tov. You have to start learning the halachas of Pesach, the halachas of Yom Tov, and in our case, it's Pesach. So therefore, from Purim, which is Yudalit, 30 days before Pesach, that's where we start. As a matter of fact, Purim, Pesach, and connect in many ways, but one of the reasons, if it's two Adar, so Purim is going to be the second Adar, is because people know that after Purim, is 30 months later is Pesach. And if you're going to start moving the Megillah to the first Adar, it's going to get confusing. So we always keep it 30 days from Purim to Pesach, and this way people know one Adar, two Adar doesn't make a difference. You have Purim, a month later is Pesach. So that was really a takona that started at the time of the Beis HaMikdash, the Chachamim made at that time. However, really after the Churban of Beis HaMikdash, the takona changed, or was a bottle, and it became that every Rav teaches his community. And that's the responsibility of the Rav to the community. Over the generation, that too has changed, because now we have Sfarim. Up until the time print was available, and even when print was available, it was still very expensive. You couldn't expect everybody to have Sfarim. But now Sfarim are readily available. So really the idea is that people are going to start learning on their own. And in order to be prepared and to know what to do. So that's one Kamal Halacha. So there is a Halacha, you have to start learning the Halachas of Pesach right after Purim. That's one thing. Another thing that starts right after Purim, 30 days before, is that we are careful about chametz. What I mean by careful about chametz doesn't mean we can't eat chametz, obviously, but we're careful where we stick chametz. We're mindful, if we're going to put something in the drawer, in the car, we're mindful of that, and we pay attention. We try to track the chametz. And the truth is, there are people that say should be careful all year. And actually, some Sfarim mentioned that if a person is careful all year about chametz, in other words, again, doesn't mean you're not chametz, but be mindful, careful, keep your Sfarim clean. Let's say, whenever you were beating with a sefer, if you, blow the crumbs or whatever, you be careful. Through that, you're fulfilling the mitzvah of bir chametz, because you're careful about the chametz. So it could be in the middle of the winter, it could be Tishri, it could be the summer, but if you are eating over a sefer, or you're putting a sefer somewhere and you're careful about the crumbs, so you're fulfilling the mitzvah of bir chametz. But in any event, 30 days before Pesach is a good time. Now we have to start being mindful where we put our sfarim, our things in the kitchen, where we put cookie crumbs, all those things. It's really a time that we have to start. Then there's another thing that we do, the different minhogim. Our minhag is, the Chabad minhag is, that 30 days before Pesach, we also start not eating matzah. In other words, we don't eat shmurei matzah from that time on. Specifically shmurei matzah. If a person needs to add the machine matzahs, certainly some machine matzahs are chametz. So that's for sure not a problem, it's chametz. But if it's machine matzah, so you can allow it, you need for lechem mishnah, something.
Sorry, so any chametz matzah is okay? Or it should be machmir?
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's
fine.
It's
like regular bread.
What?
It's like regular bread.
Regular bread, right.
Okay.
I don't have a voice.
And but if you have shmurei matzah, from last year, or for you already bought, whatever it is, you have to be careful. Now, really, the halacha is Erev Pesach. The Gemara says Erev Pesach, one is not allowed to eat matzah. That's in order to have it fresh and exciting for the Seder. So we don't need that. Some minhogim start from Rosh Chodesh, because there are certain things that we start from Rosh Chodesh, certain things related to Pesach, and as a matter of fact, in the Haggadah itself, which is taken from Chazal, from the Gemara, the Gemara asks the question if we could have the Seder earlier. There's a piece in the Haggadah that starts Yochel Rosh Chodesh. Could it be that we have to start talking about Yitzis Mitzrayim from Rosh Chodesh on? And the answer is no, because it has to be B'shashesh Matzah Mora Menachem Lefanecha. The sipur, the story of going out of Mitzrayim, has to be said when we have the matzah and the mora in front of us. The Gemara says, Yochlim Be'edyem, could it be then during the day you could do it at Pesach? He says, no, it has to be B'layla Hazeh, that night. But there is a Havamina that from Rosh Chodesh on, things related to Pesach start. So, therefore, there is certain minhogim, don't eat matzah from Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Some go until Erev Pesach. But the Chabad custom is that from now on already, from Purim till Pesach, we do not eat any matzah, shmona matzah, during that time. So that's things that started during the month of Nisan. The Rebbe added also, connected to that, Shloshim Yom Lifnei Chag, we should worry about Mois Chitim, make sure that people have the funds that they need in order to celebrate Pesach. So if we know people in need, or funds that collect, to participate in that. And Miftzah Matzah, to make sure that people have access to Shmona Matzah. In other words, people you meet at work, people you meet, in the office, or whatever it is, or in the street, you go Miftzahim. So make sure that those people have access to Shmona Matzah. I don't know how it is in Baltimore. I'm sure it's easy to get. Here, you could get in Costco and everywhere. Tell them to go to Publix if you don't have. But it's available everywhere. But that's important to make sure that people have Shmona Matzah. Now, Shmona Matzah, the Rebbe insisted that everybody should have it for Sdorim and things like that. Public Sdorim, that's what I meant. But it's important for the Seder. Why is it most important for the Seder? Because for the Seder is when you have a mitzvah to eat matzah. The rest of Pesach, there's no mitzvah to eat matzah. You can't eat bread, obviously, but you don't necessarily have a mitzvah to eat matzah. Only the night of the Seder, which is the reason why only at the night of the Seder we said the bracha, Asher kideshonu b'mitzvah v'tzivanu, Hashem sanctified through His commandment and commanded us, al achilas matzah, to eat matzah. It's only at the Seder we have the mitzvah of eating matzah. The rest of Pesach, we say Amritz Lechem, it's bread. It's not chametz bread, but it's bread. But a mitzvah to eat matzah, it's only the night of the Seder. One of the problems of machine matzahs is they can't be done for the sake of the mitzvah, because it's a machine doing it. So you can't. It's hard to do anything for a mitzvah. Should be done Hashem mitzvah for the sake of the mitzvah. Just like you don't want to have a pair of tefillin, the bottom, made by a machine. It has to be a person behind it. Not could be a person is using tools and a machine, but it has to be the person is behind and is doing the tefillin and pressing or whatever, doing all the things necessary for the tefillin, or any other thing for the tzitzis. Something you don't want a machine to do the tzitzis. It has to be done with the sake of the mitzvah. So too with the matzah, it should be done for the sake of the mitzvah. And that's possible, or mostly possible, when it's done by hand. So hand matzahs. Beside that, shmura is obviously a hidur. In terms of shmura means that it's the wheat is guarded from the time of the harvest. There is what's used to call pshutim. I don't know if we find this nowadays, if it still exists in terms of what's commercially available, which means that they had the wheat guarded only from the time it was turned into flour. Before that, they weren't careful. Shmura is from the time earlier, from the time of the harvest. They're careful with it. So it's an extra degree of hidur, an extra degree of being careful and so on. So certainly for the storim, you should have shmura, handmade matzah, for that purpose. Now there are machine shmura matzahs also, but not handmade obviously. You could buy machine matzahs, which is shmura. But handmade, I don't know if you could find pshutim. I assume every handmade matzah is shmura from the flour that was guarded and watched from the time of the harvest. So in any event, we have to make sure that people have access to shmura matzah. That's part of the miftzah. All of that takes place already in the month of Adar. These are things that we could already do during the month of Adar. Yeah.
Yes. So what with all those shmura matzah made with spelt and oats?
Some things.
They're
from the time of the harvest. When instead of using wheat, they use oats or spelt or other things like that. It's the same idea.
And the people who do use shmura machine made. So how do they mekayem the hidur of?
So this idea that is done is that the person, the mashgiach, whoever it is in the factory, they push the button to get it started. That's the lishma. That's what it does.
Okay.
Right. Now there are other shilas and other things in terms of using machine matzah, and it's certainly best to have by hand. Some people, I mean, again, we have the arguments on both sides of the aisle, but obviously we know by Chabad that Rebbeim will carefully should be handmade. But you have arguments in terms of sometimes you could have dough that gets stuck in the machines, in the machinery, or the metal goes through machines, gets heated, so it becomes chometz faster. That's one thing. Other people say, no, it's even better than by hand, because the machine goes so much faster. You don't have to wait 14 minutes. It goes so fast. And then the oven burn everything that it could be. Everybody has an argument one way or the other. But certainly for us, it's and for public, for the Zdorim, that we're trying to push people to use those handmade shmura matzah. So that's in month of Adar. Then in the month of Nisan proper, once that starts, we have certain minhogim. Now this Shabbos is Shabbos Para. Next Shabbos is Shabbos HaChodesh, and if I'm not mistaken, Rosh Chodesh Nisan is on Sunday. So therefore, from 10 days or whatever, almost 2 weeks from now, from Rosh Chodesh Nisan on, you have certain minhogims that fall into place. The whole entire month of Nisan, we don't say Tachnun, and everything that goes along with Tachnun. So Kerbar Chapayim, Mondays and Thursdays, Lam Natzich Yantcha Bitun Asher and Valdisirin, Vrach Vim Tzizkos on Shabbos, and so on. And even Shabbos Vachim Iyar, we don't say over Achimim. Now the reason why it's mentioned even Shabbos Vachim Iyar is because there are certain minhogim to say over Achimim Shabbos Vachim Iyar and Shabbos Vachim Sivan. And the reason is there were many pogroms, devastating pogroms that took place at the time of the Crusades, and that's when they composed the Tefillah over Achimim, with that said, Hashem Yikon Damam, Hashem should avenge the people that were murdered. And this happened, in particular, at the time of the Crusade, particularly the time of Sivan, the month of Sivan. We had a lot of pogroms that happened, unfortunately. And so for that period, that's when real Over Achim was composed for that time. So some people say that's what Alter Rebbe writes. Shabbos Vachim Sivan, even though Shabbos Vachim, we don't normally say Over Achimim, but Shabbos Vachim Sivan we do say Over Achimim, because that was the era, really, the time period of the year when those pogroms really took place. Some people also said Iyar, but Alter Rebbe says no, we don't do it because it's in the month of Nisan. In the month of Nisan, we don't say Over Achimim. So it's not right to say Over Achimim on Shabbos Vachim Iyar, even though the time deserves it, because that was the time of the pogroms. But during the month of Nisan, we don't say Tachanun, we don't say eulogies, and so on and so forth, which I guess in some way is related to Yom HaShoah, which is also the end of the month of Nisan. People in Israel made it to the day of mourning, to remembrance of the Holocaust, and the Rebbe said that's wrong. It's the month of Nisan. We don't do eulogies, we don't do anything related to that, to mourning. So it's not the right time for that. I mean, so not just the Rebbe, but many Gedolim also said that's it's not right to do it at that time. You should find another date, which many have chosen the date of Asara B'Tevis as the day of remembrance of the Holocaust, the Yom Kaddish HaKloli, and so on, because it shouldn't be the month of Nisan. So no Tachnun in the entire month of Nisan. Anything related to Tachnun is also skipped during the month of Nisan. Then we're also not allowed to fast during the month of Nisan. No fasting. Now, obviously, we talk public fast is no public fast. But even if an individual wants to fast, we don't do it during the month of Nisan. That's not the right time for that. And obviously, Erev Pesach is different. You have the firstborn. That's an exception. But other than that, there is no fast on that. There are people who typically fast, and that's a chosan and a kala. On the day of the wedding, chosan and kala normally fast on that day, on the day of the wedding. So the month of Nisan, they do fast. If they get married during the month of Nisan, they will fast. And not only that, they will also fast Rosh Chodesh Nisan. You could also fast even though it's Rosh Chodesh. And even though normally we don't fast on Rosh Chodesh, Rosh Chodesh Nisan is an exception. And the reason it's an exception because it's a happy day, it's Rosh Chodesh, but it is also the yahrzeit of Nadav and Avihu. So it's a sad day also a little bit. Remember, once there was the dedication of the Mishkan in the desert, this took place for Chodesh Nisan, and on that day, Nadav and Avihu entered the Kodesh HaKadoshim, they brought the Ketores that weren't supposed to, and they died on that day. And that kind of messed up the celebration in some way. So it's a day of the yahrzeit of the Stut Tzadikim, and the day of yahrzeit, some have a custom to fast. So because it's also a little bit of a sad day, it's okay for a person Kala to fast on that day, on the day of Rosh Chodesh Nisan. However, the Chassan Kal would not fast and will not fast Isru Chag, the day after Pesach, because that's already not allowed to fast. That's Moshe Minadin, we don't fast Isru Chag. So we don't do that. Then another custom that we have is the Nasim. Every day we say the Pash of the Nasi of the day. The Nasim also is to commemorate that same period we spoke about Nadav and Avihu, the same period when we dedicated the Mishkan. And for the dedication of the Mishkan, every single day, one Shevet brought korbanos, specific korbanos on the day in honor of the Mishkan. That lasted 12 days. So Chodesh Nisan started, and it was Yehuda, and then every day for 12 days was another Nasi that brought it. And so every day we read the Parsha of the Nasi. Our custom, as you know, is to say it from the Siddur. Some people take out a Sefer Torah. That's not a Chabad minhag. Take out the Sefer Torah for them. There are people that do it and they learn it from the Sefer Torah. We don't do that. We take it from the Siddur and we add a Yehirotzen that comes afterwards. When we ask Hashem that, we to shine His revelation that come upon a certain Shevet of that day, we should also have the same revelations. The Rebbe Rashab said that even if a person knows exactly what Shevet is from, for instance, Kohanim, Levim, they know they're from Shevet Levi, nonetheless, they should still say the Yehirotzen because it says the language in Hayom is that Shaykh to Ibur HaNeshama, Shaykh to the state of the Neshama before he came down to a particular Shevet. That's the stage of a pregnancy, is before the cell, so to speak, before the child is developed into exactly what it's going to be. So that's the neshama. It's also shech the neshama before it ends up being part of a certain shevet. So that madriga also we ask for the revelation, and therefore that madriga, it's a little bit. So we're going to use the mashal of the ibor of an unborn child. This is like stem cell, if so to speak. It could turn out to be any shevet. So any person has within themselves the ability from being from any shevet. And therefore, we have in us this connection to all Shvatim. So we should say the Yehirotzen for all Shvatim, even if we're Kohen or Levi, and we know we're not from another Shevet. On the 13th of Nisan, we continue reading the Nisim, although it's not exactly the Nisim. The last part is Zois Chanukas HaMizbeach, which is the summary of all the gifts offered by the Nisim. And then we'll go into Ba'alei Sasanes, which is really the next parsha, when Hashem told Moshe to tell Aaron to light up the menorah. This is going to be the how do you call it? This is going to be the dedication that Aaron brought. In other words, Shevet Levi will bring. So that's the gift of Shevet Levi. So what we have so far is that we have 13 days or 12 days, really, at the time the Mishkan was 12 days of celebration. We read the Nisim of every day. And the 13th, we read, there's no Yehirotzen for that, but we read Ba'alis, Ziz Chanukas, and Ba'alischa, which corresponds to the Shevet of Levi. And there's no Yehirotzen for that particular day. Now, in that period of time, of course, we have different days. And Ami mentioned to me, make sure not to forget Yud Aleph Nisan. But before going to Yud Aleph Nisan, let's go back to the beginning of the month. We have Beis Nisan is the yahrzeit of the Rebbe Rashab, so that's also an important day. And as the Rebbe stressed, it's also the day the Frierdiker Rebbe became Rebbe, so that's also an important day. And of course, Yud Aleph Nisan, the Rebbe's birthday, and that's a very, very special day. And we're entering a special year this year because we're starting the 120th year of the Rebbe. That's when we're starting 120. Finishing Kapitel Kuf Yutes, entering Kuf Chof, and next year will be pay base, will be 120 from Tafresh Sabach base, from the Rebbe's birth. So we're starting the 120th year since the Rebbe's birth. Yud Gimel, we spoke about Yud Gimel Nisan. Yud Gimel Nisan is the Stalkus of the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek passed away that day, and by the Rebbe, there was usually, I mean, at least my days, was a Fabrengen that night, which is really the night, so Yud Gimel, and I don't mean, Yud Gimel is really Yud Dalet, the night of Dikas Chometz, there would be a Fabrengen. Because the Rebbe always made Fabrengen at the end, the conclusion of a day. So let's say Yud Aleph Nisan, Fabrengen would be at the end of Yud Aleph Nisan. So Yud Gimel Nisan would be at the end of Yud Gimel, which is really Yud Dalet. So that's the night of Dikas Chometz. So that's the regular night of Dikas Chometz. So there will be a Fabrengen, it's my yours, in honor of Yud Gimel Nisan also. And then Yud Dalet is Erev Pesach, which is a Yom Tov for itself, because we're bringing Korban Pesach. Then you have, really, we're up to 2 weeks of Yom Tovim celebration. Then you have the 7 or 8 days of Pesach, plus Yisro Chag. So it's really 9 days there's no Tachnun, and therefore Chazal says, since already most of the month is without Tachnun, because most of the month is Yom Tovim, then the last few days that remain, we'll kind of bridge it, and we'll continue with that Tachnun for the rest of the month. So that's, again, the meaning of saying the Nisim. That's from Rosh Chodesh, we start, until you get a base with a Yeratzen, Yud Gimel without a Yeratzen. Another thing that takes place during the month of Nisan is Birkas Eilonis. The bracha we say, Birkas Eilonis literally means the bracha for the trees. The language in Shulchan Aruch is, Hayetze b'mei Nisan, someone goes out the month of Nisan, V'rei Eilonis, and he sees trees, Hameitzim Parachim, that are blossoming, they're flowers. So you have to say the following bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, shelo chisar ba'olam miklum, that nothing is missing in his world. Uvaru v'briyas teves v'eilonis teves, who created good creatures and good trees, le'enos b'hem b'nei adam, that people could enjoy from it, benefit from it. Now, in the regular older edition of Telas Hashem, the bracha does not appear in all the regular brachas that we have, which is like around benching. It's in Birkas Anenin. In other words, every siddur has, or most siddurim have, the halachas of brachas from the Alter Rebbe, and in there is that bracha. That's Perek Yud Gimel and Sif Yud Dalet in the Alter Rebbe, in the Hilchos Birkas Anenin, in the siddur. I think some siddurim, the newer Israeli siddurim, where they put all the minhogim and things like that, change things around. So I think there they have a section for the month of Nisan. It starts with Nisim, and I believe it's in there. But otherwise, you have it in Hilchos Birkas Hanenin. You have it over there. Probably Google it, and I'm sure it'll appear. But you have it over there. So that's Birkas Ilonis. Those Ilonis, those trees have to be fruit trees, not just any things. Although mostly, mostly fruit trees and flowers. But it has to be a fruit trees, and ideally, if it's possible, we said the bracha when we see 2 trees. That's the best, 2 trees and flowers. Sometimes it's not simple to find 2 trees and flowers, we just see 1. So then you could also say the bracha on 1. But the language is ilonis, tevis, good fruits in plural, good trees in plural. So it's good to have the plural if you said the bracha. So we are sticking and respecting the text of the bracha by saying those 2 things. So that's why it's better to have those 2 trees. There is we only say this bracha once during the month of Nisan, and we only say it during the month of Nisan. There are some who have the custom that says that in the month of Nisan around, so it could be Adar, it could be Nisan, it could be Iyar, but the Alter Rebbe mentioned specifically the month of Nisan. It means that even though now, let's say for us in Miami, I don't think it's like that in Baltimore, but in Miami, we have the mangoes already in flowers right now, and we have to wait 2 weeks. Hopefully, in 2 weeks, they'll still be in flowers, a little less than 2 weeks. They'll still be in flowers, and we're not going to have the fruit starting to bud at that time, and we'll be able to say the bracha. Maybe there'll be later trees that'll blossom at that time. But that's in terms of the Birkas Eilonis. Going along, we have the different Okay, well, the Shabbos before Pesach, it's in that order over here. Shabbos before Pesach, this year is going to be really after B'dikas Chometz. So we're going to move the order around, but let's continue with the Shabbos HaGodol. Shabbos before Pesach is Shabbos HaGodol. We call it Shabbos HaGodol, the big Shabbos, among other things, because there's a big miracle that took place in that time. That's what Alter brings, which was that the civil war with the Egyptian firstborn. Right? Chazal tell us that Shabbos before going out of Egypt was 4 days before. And Modar Hashem, there was Yud Nisan, the 10th of Nisan. That's when the day Hashem told Moshe to take, everybody should take a sheep, tie it to the beds, bring it to the house, and 4 days later, shecht it. So the Egyptians saw the Jewish people taking those animals home, and they asked him, what's going on, what this is all about? And he said, well, this is because Hashem is going to kill all the b'cheres, all the firstborn of Egypt, and he told us we have to sacrifice those sheep and put the blood on the doors. This way we're going to be saved. The Jews are going to be saved. And this was after the 9th Makkah already. Coming up to the 10th Makkah's b'cheres. The Egyptians knew that if the Yidden are saying this is going to be a plague, it's happening. This is not, if it's going to happen, it's maybe when it's going to happen, but it's for sure going to happen. So the firstborn got very nervous and they went to Pilate. Said, you got to let the people go. Let the Jewish people out. We don't want to die. And Pilate, the establishment, refused, and the civil war erupted. There was a rebellion, insurrection, whatever the word we use these days. So there was that insurrection, and there was a whole civil war that started. And a lot of Egyptians died that day, killed by Egyptians. Or as the Pesach says, L'makem Mitzrayim v'chareyam. Hashem punished the Egyptians through their firstborn. The firstborn themselves launched a civil war, and that caused a lot of Egyptians to die. So that was a big miracle that without any outside intervention, the Egyptians themselves, Egypt collapsed so much that the Egyptians themselves were fighting each other to let the Yidden out. So because of that, we established that Shabbos is going to be a big miracle. Big Shabbos, Shabbos HaGodol. Now, this was Yud Nisan. It's quite exceptional that we fix a date based on the month, but based on the day of the week. Every single day we have in a calendar is based on the day of the month. When Purim, we celebrate Purim Midalit Adar, we don't know what day, I don't know what day of the week it was. Maybe some people do. I don't know what day of the month, what day of the week it was, because we don't celebrate like that. Maybe it was on a Tuesday, and we should celebrate Purim every Tuesday, the second Tuesday in Adar. That's not how our calendar works. Yet, when it comes to Shabbos HaGodol, it's always going to be the Shabbos before Pesach, because that's a miracle that took place on Shabbos, which is really not connected to Shabbos. It was the fact that it was 4 days before going out of Mitzrayim, and that's when the miracle happened, because that's when Yidden took the animals. But the reason why we celebrate on Shabbos is because eventually Yud Nisan became the day of Miriam's passing, Moshe's sister. And therefore, Chazal, we didn't want to establish a Yom Tov on that day to mark the celebration. So the Yartzeit was Yud, and we always mark a Yartzeit with Yud. And that day to celebrate, since it was Shabbos, we celebrate Shabbos before Pesach as a way of celebration. Now, it is customary that the Rav gives a drasha on Shabbos HaGodol also, talks about the idea of Pesach and so on. Most likely this year, where Shabbos HaGodol is really Shabbos before Pesach, it's real Erev Pesach. So it's a little too late to tell people halachas and reminders, because it's already Shabbos. There's not much you could do when it's 3 hours away from Pesach. So the drasha will be a Shabbos before, a little bit earlier in our year. However, there is a special thing for us this year, besides everything else that moves around in the calendar, because it's out of Pesach and Shabbos at the same time. But there's a minhag of Shabbos HaGodol that is different when it's out of Pesach. And that is, we say Haftarah, a particular Haftarah, Arva Lashem, which talks about the beer of the Meiser and so on. So we said that a particular Haftarah. Some people said this Haftarah every Shabbos HaGodol. No matter what day of the week is Pesach, Shabbos before Pesach, they're going to say a special Haftarah for Shabbos HaGodol. This is not Chabad Minhag, although the Rebbeim would say it. Our Chabad Minhag is that we say the regular Haftarah, unless it's out of Pesach. So Erev Pesach, it's the time when we're going to say that. Now the reason is that this Haftarah talks about what we call Biur Meiser. Biur Meiser is the following. You have, when you think Meiser, twice in every cycle of Shemitah, you had to get rid of all the Meiser that was left. You have to make Biur Meiser, and you have to, any Meiser that was there, you have to make it Hefker, you have to take it out. And this was done twice in a cycle, Erev Pesach. And this year, since Erev Shabbos Agol will be Erev Pesach, that's when we're going to say this particular Haftarah. We also say Shabbos Agol Avodim Ainu after Mincha, and the how do you call it? The reason is that because already Shabbos, we get ready, we get in the mood. We talk about the Haftarah, we talk about the Haggadah, we talk about Pesach. So already from then we start talking about that. Now, there would be a thought, a svara, this year not to say Avodim Ainu. And I already said why. Because the Haggadah says, Yochel B'Yem, could it be that we could recite the Haggadah that same day? And say, Gemara, no, it has to be B'Shash Matzah Moreh Munachim L'Fanecha. You can only recite the Haggadah when the Matzah Moreh are there. And it has to be B'Layla at night. So because the Haggadah clearly says, you can't say the Haggadah B'Yem, therefore there would be a reason that we don't say the Haggadah this year, Erev Pesach, because that's going, so to speak, against what the Mishnah says. That we can't say the Haggadah Mibayjim. Nonetheless, the minhag Chabad is that we do recite it because we recite it every Shabbos Haggadah. It's not specifically to that. It happens to be Erev Pesach. But the minhag is Shabbos Haggadah. We say the Haggadah. So we're not doing it in order to be Yotzev. There's a mitzvah of saying Tzipur Mitzvah with the Haggadah, which is what the Gemara meant over there. The Mishnah says, could it be that we're going to say the story of Bebayjim? It means to be Yotzev. It doesn't just mean to talk about it. You're allowed to talk out of Pesach about going out of Mitzrayim. There's no Aveda to say, tonight is Pesach, we're going to talk about going out of Mitzrayim. There's no problem with that. Reciting the Haggadah for the sake of reciting the Haggadah, that we're not allowed. But that's not what we're doing. We're reciting the Haggadah for the sake of getting us in the mood, so to speak. So therefore, the minhag is that on even such a kviz out of Pesach, we are going to say the Haggadah. Now, this year is a little bit different, but regular Shabbos Haggadah, since it's Shabbos before Pesach, we don't say Vinoy about the Kodesh, because we don't say it when there's a Yom Tov during the week. The reason I'm saying this week is different, because Motzei Shabbos is going to be Yom Tov already. We're going to be the davening of Yom Tov, and therefore there's never Vinoy about the Kodesh in that particular, on the night of Yom Tov. So that's not relevant for this year. Just a little bit about this year's calendar, because we're already mentioning things, and then we'll go back into details a bit later. But this year, because we're talking about Achonos to Pesach, what happens is as follows. Really, the night of Bdikas Chometz, in theory, should be Friday night, because to say there's Motzei Shabbos. So the night before is Bdikas Chometz. Obviously, we can't do Bdikas Chometz on Shabbos. So Bdikas Chometz is going to be moved up to Thursday night, one day earlier. So we're going to say Bdikas Chometz then. And then Friday, we're going to say the regular Bdikas Chometz with the bracha and call Chamira, like we always do. Friday, there's going to be Biur Chometz, burning the Chometz out of Shabbos, not out of Pesach, but out of Shabbos. We're going to go burn the Chometz. We are not going to say the Kol Chamira. We just burn the Chometz, said there's a Yerotzen over there, you could say that, but there's no Kol Chamira. By then, theoretically, you could still have as much Chometz as you want. It's not Pesach, it's not Erev Pesach. Erev Pesach is Friday. So you could have Chometz, you could go from Biur Chometz, you could go have a nice sandwich if you want, but you have to be very careful with the crumbs, because your house is more or less kosher to Pesach, it should be, by the time Pesach Shabbos comes in, and you have to be careful with everything. So if you still have Chometz, just be careful about it. Make sure you don't put it everywhere, because you already burned the Chometz. You should leave a minimum amount of Chometz for Shabbos. In other words, for lechem mishneh and whatever else you need, being very careful and very cautious about that. Remember, you can't burn it, you can't really do much with it. So leave, calculate what you need, sell, family, the kids, in terms of chametz for Pesach. Normally, the kitchen should really all be Pesach because you can't turn it around on Shabbos. So the whole kitchen is ready for Pesach. And all you're going to need is to have some bread for lechem mishneh. You can't use matzah because before Pesach, especially Erev Pesach, we don't use matzah. That would be easier. This way you don't have to have any bread at all. You just have matzah and you're good. But we don't use matzah at Pesach. So you have to have challah. You have to have chametz. So you're going to use a minimum amount of chametz for Friday night for lechem mishneh. Being careful of the crumbs. Probably the best what would be, wrap it very well. Then you go wash and eat the bread somewhere else, maybe outside in the yard or wherever it is. And then rinse your mouth, rinse your hands, and start eating the Pesach dishes and the Pesach food for the rest of the meal. Shabbos morning, davening is going to have to be earlier. This way we have time to come home, to have a Suda with bread, lechem mishneh, before the time when you're not allowed to eat chametz anymore. So whatever the time will be, I don't know, around 11, something like that. I didn't check the time. We're almost a month ahead of us. But let's say whatever it is, so davening has to be over, but so you could come back home and have the chametz that you need to have on time before Seif Achilas, the Seif Zman Achilas chametz. After that, you have an hour to stop the time of you cannot eat it anymore till you have to make sure it disappears. So either you finished eating all the chametz that you have, there's no chametz, or you still have some crumbs or whatever it is, then you could flush it down the toilet and rinse it down the sink, rinse your mouth, whatever you have, and make sure there's no chametz. Chametz is gone. At that moment, before the end of Zman of owning chametz, then we'll recite the Kol Chamira. The Kol Chamira we typically say by the time of the burning of the chametz. We're going to say it Shabbos morning. After we finish and we dispose of all the chametz that we have, then we'll say Kol Chamira. Any chametz that I still have that I don't know about, then it should be nullified. It's all gone. I don't own it. I don't want it. It's all finished. So that's going to be that. And after that, how do you call it? It's no chametz for the rest of the day. And because it's Erev Pesach, we'll come back to it with the halachas of Erev Pesach. We'll get closer to the end. But because it's Erev Pesach, there's certain things we don't eat anymore on Erev Pesach. Mostly, we don't eat things that go into the mortar and the chareises. And matzah, obviously. So no, for the chareises is apple, pear, walnuts. So we don't eat it. If the kids are already old enough to understand what's going on, we should not give them apple, pears, or nuts, walnuts. And the mortar is chaim and the romaine lettuce that we use. So out of Pesach also, if you have gefilte fish, no chaim on your gefilte fish out of Pesach. Friday night, okay. Shabbos by day, you can't have chaim with your gefilte fish. You're going to have to suffer until the next, after the second seder, to add chaim to that. And no romaine lettuce because it's out of Pesach, so you can't have it. So these are also related to Erev Pesach. And in the afternoon, if you could snack on other things, and but not those items that we don't eat Erev Pesach. So this is for Erev Pesach. Again, once we get closer to Erev Pesach itself, we'll reveal those halachos as they become more relevant. This isn't just now as a preparation because we went through the first 2 weeks of preparing. I think we'll stop here tonight. And next week we'll go into already, bdikas chametz and preparing for Pesach itself, and then we'll have the seder mitzvah, and we'll go through that. Any questions before we stop? Good. Yeah, Ben.
Oh.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.